AviaDev brings you SkyHeroes. These heroes are slightly different. They don't possess any superpowers. They are not going to save the world. But if you're interested in aviation and you need a little break from all the negative news, they might save your day. Because they breathe the aviation industry inside out. They have decades of experience in the business. They have an opinion, and they are not afraid to use it. SkyHeroes. And now your host. Very few people across the globe are able to pronounce his name correctly, but he doesn't really care. Juraj Toth.
Let's start with something I am personally very curious about. So earlier, a couple of weeks ago, there was this rumor, everybody everywhere in the news, Wizz Air potentially was interested in taking over EasyJet and put EasyJet and putting a bid in. So far, nobody from Wizz Air has confirmed that. Do you think, John, that it will stay a rumor forever, or somebody will share later something interesting with us?
Someone will share their perspective of it at some point, either in a casual bar chat or as part of, an annual report or something. But yeah, it was a bit of a surprise. It wasn't what we expected. For many, Wizz Air are a bit of an upstart compared to EasyJet, but I think it highlights a fundamental problem of EasyJet in that they're migrating away from being a bit of a low-cost carrier to a mid-market carrier. And that historically has not been a good place for airlines to live. So, they've got to get back in control of their cost and really begin to strip them back down again and get lean and mean.
You say that, but EasyJet actually reduced its losses over the course of this summer, whereas both Ryanair and Wizz, they actually widened their losses because they were just throwing capacity at everything, any opportunity they could see, whereas EasyJet's been very measured throughout the pandemic and has actually reduced the amount of money it's hemorrhaging. So yeah, they're not.
They had no choice, Joe, because what was until very recently their largest shareholder was looking at them like a hawk, wasn't he? Stelios was over it like a rash, and he was very keen to make sure that they were doing everything they possibly could to, button down the hatches. Whereas both Wizz and Ryanair, you expect that more maverick approach. I think you've also got to reflect on what was scheduled to fly and what actually did fly, because throughout the height of the pandemic, Wizz were, at one stage they had a whole program flying out of Luton and none of them operated.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah.
If you look into EasyJet, the standing today, just to wrap up how they are linked versus Ryanair and Wizz Air, I think EasyJet is the third largest airline now in Europe measured in movements, while Ryanair is by far the number one, and I think Lufthansa is in second place. And regarding to John and this mid-market definition of EasyJet instead of being a low-cost carrier, I think you're into something there, because EasyJet and Johan Lundgren, the CEO actually from Sweden, he has been very clear about that EasyJet is going to more main airports than secondary airports, and that indicates that EasyJet is targeting something else than the ultra low cost carriers of Ryanair and Wizz Air. And we might see some similarities with the Norwegian. Actually, before Norwegian went into reconstruction in 2020-21, and what we see of Norwegian today is not 100% ultra low cost. It's something in between. So I think, could it be something that you can have this segment, network carriers, mid-level carriers, and ultra low cost carriers? Could they move together, or could there be a marketplace for these three segments?
It's interesting. You know, I think we've seen airlines get into that space, and ultimately you might survive for a couple of years, but it's not a nice warm feeling on your backside, that's for sure. But I think, you know, ultimately Wizz were really lucky. They dodged a mammoth bullet there, didn't they? They were going to pay a big price because they were hoping that they'd be able to get into Gatwick and the London market in a big way. And although it's still doubtful what's going to happen, you know, actually part of the core problem here is Gatwick doesn't really have a position for British Airways short haul fleet, and yet BA won't give up Gatwick. You know, they need to vacate the market. It's Gatwick's problem is not EasyJet, and it wouldn't be Wizz. It's BA short haul.
But in the case it was Wizz Air, and if it was Wizz Air, I would say it was Indigo Partners, the main owner in the United States, who was behind the offer on EasyJet. What did Wizz Air want to get into EasyJet? Because that's a different. They operate in a different segment. They have much higher cost base. They have the slots in Gatwick and a number of other airports, but mainly main airports, right? And they have the Airbus, which is comparable with Wizz Air. They have orders at Airbus that Wizz Air might go into, but Indigo Partners, they placed the biggest order for Airbus ever. I think in Dubai Air Show, it was maybe 2019. Was it 400 Airbus they put an order there? So, I mean, they don't lack the new aircraft. So what was behind it, John?
Well, I do think it is access to London and that lucrative market, and there is an undoubted waterfall of demand in London. If you can get into Heathrow, you get into Heathrow, and then you go to Gatwick, and no one wants to go to Stansted, quite frankly, because you know you get beaten over the head by an Irish mallet, and yields are absolutely rubbish. So they don't want to get into that contest. Gatwick also has a degree of business traffic, and it has, which I think is interesting in the way the market is shaping up. It has a degree of North American connectivity, particularly to the US. And JetBlue came in last week. Probably aren't carrying many people at the moment, but you know we're seeing the 321 being used for transatlantics in an increasing number of flights a week. So maybe it was that bridgehead into the east coast of the US, Boston, Toronto, Washington, New York, all of those sort of things. But does Wizz or does Indigo really want to play in that territory when there's so many other places that they could operate to?
I think you're right on the slots, John. I think it absolutely was about Gatwick slots. You know, Veraldi's made a lot of noise throughout the pandemic about the kind of slot protection that's going on and the waivers and how it's all so very unfair to an airline that's prepared to bring in a lot of aircraft and start flying lots of those slots. But I think more than that, it was about squashing competition. You know, one less player in the European low-cost market is, you know, a million more opportunities for an airline like Wizz. And I think, you know, that would have been more where they were coming from. They don't need those aircraft and they don't particularly need that business. You know, it's not entirely the way that they operate. So I really do think it was just a case of let's take out one of the competition and then we're in a bigger and better place. And the bonus is we get our foot in the door at Gatwick.
Yeah. And, you know, classically in many business models and in many supply chains, there's probably no more than 3 major suppliers in a market. You know, and the European low-cost aviation scene is beginning to get a bit cluttered, quite frankly, because, you know, you've got EasyJet, Ryanair, you've got Wizz, you've got Vueling, you know, it's taking out one of those, getting back down to 3 would be a really good investor shareholder message. Mm-hmm. And with the lowest cost base, ultimately in many businesses, the lowest cost base is the greatest place to be.
Coming back to what you already mentioned, John, there were plans within BA to set up a new daughter company, low-cost airline, something based in Gatwick. But I mean, from your experience, from what you know about the industry for the last decades, was that ever a realistic plan to do that within the BA structure?
Well, I think much of BA's activity at Gatwick has been defensive, and they've never really understood, certainly in the short haul market, what it was about. You know, 15 years ago, they were trying to create a secondary hub for intra-European traffic. through Gatwick, they were doing things like 7 or 8 flights a day to Manchester. I remember coming back from Manchester, the only passenger. You know, bizarre. And I think it was just a pipe dream, and it was never focused, and it never attracted the business demand that was necessary. It was all down the back, and it was all very cheap and relatively cheerful. So it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, but they just became obsessed with, we want to hold on to the slots. We don't want to give, you know, EasyJet have ratcheted up to, I think it's about 44% of frequencies. They don't want anyone to get any bigger than that. And then it's just holding a position. If you accept that Heathrow is a contained market and a contained size, just fight the battle where your business is and defend your fortress, rather than defend, you know, the store's cupboard that's 2 miles down the road and actually isn't of much value to you.
Hans, you mentioned a very interesting thing yesterday when we had a pre-discussion, that you are not so sure. I mean, Wizz Air CEO is saying everywhere that they don't have any plans to go transatlantic, but at the same time, we know they have a massive order of A321s, including LRs. I'm not sure about XLRs, but definitely LRs, which can easily make it from London to the US. I mean, as we see from JetBlue example. So what makes you think that?
You know, Wizz Air has enormous future growth plans. Where should you put your capacity? Okay, they tried in Norway, it didn't end up with a success. They're doing much more successful in Abu Dhabi, where you see constantly new routes. They are doing also pretty well in Italy, where they are fighting head to head with Ryanair. So where to grow? East from Eastern Europe, further east, or west from you know, the Golden Gate in London, and then use you know, those 321 long range for Gatwick East Coast operations. And in that context, it might be that EasyJet could be a supplier in terms of feed from main airports, while Wizz Air would do the point-to-point Europe traffic in the lower end. I think one should know when CEOs of any airline says that we are not going to do that. I would pay attention to see that doesn't mean, sometimes they actually mean the completely opposite without me knowing what Josef Varadi is thinking about now. But I would not be surprised that somewhere you have to put your capacity. And London, East Coast, is not a bad option, I would say.
It isn't, but it's very hard for a European LCC to effectively utilize aircraft on the transatlantic compared to a US LCC. You know, a US LCC can come out late at night from the US, gets into Europe, London, early morning, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, can turn the aircraft straight back round. But an LCC from Europe, leaving London at, you know, a reasonable time, can't get back without a 4, 5, maybe even a 6 or 7 hour dwell time on the ground in a US airport. And that is not giving the hours and the utilization that they need.
Yeah, and I think, you know, under normal circumstances, that market is so crowded and so difficult to get into. You know, they wouldn't be the only ones flying narrow bodies across the Atlantic. You've got Aer Lingus doing it as well. You've got, you know, WestJet and the Canadian airlines are all starting that as well. I think if you see those LRs going a bit further, I think the direction they'll be going is east. And that is, you know, where there is a lack of capacity and a lack of connectivity into the Indian subcontinent, into Eastern Asia. And I think that's where Wizz is going to point its long distance capacity in the future.
Yeah, I agree that Abu Dhabi could be a good business case. But if you look to what North Atlantic Airways, they came with some announcement, a Norwegian low-cost long-haul carrier that will start up in the first half next year. They informed the market here that they are planning to use Stewart Airport outside of New York, and also Ontario Airport, which is outside Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. So if you look into, if Wizz Air should go look for secondary airports on the East Coast, you would not have that bottleneck that John is referring to, that you have the ground time of the aircraft. So I mean, these guys, they have to disrupt the market, and it doesn't make sense to fly to New York or JFK. It's too expensive. You don't get the slots. But as long as you know that you can get a good connectivity on the ground service from Stuart into New York, you don't use more than just an hour to get into Manhattan from that airport. And that's you hardly have any traffic jam or something there. So
and it's not the congestion on the ground; it is the time differential. You know, if you're using that aircraft and you want to get back, if you want to turn it straight round and you're operating a near conventional schedule out of Europe, then you're looking. You would be arriving at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning in Gatwick. Well, actually, you wouldn't, because you'd be waking me up, and you're not going to do that. So. That's the problem. The time difference doesn't work to their advantage, whereas it does for the US carriers.
Well, at the same time, if the price is right and too attractive, I'm sure. I mean, can there be the market big enough to
there might be.
this?
I mean, I was fascinated by Hans saying that about Norse Air. I mean, that would be such a great discussion. Going back to Stuart Airport and saying, "Hello, we're back again. We're just a different airline now, but with the same history." And it didn't work last time, did it? So what's going to make it work this time?
I have just one thought come up to me, John, and maybe pretty wild. But what about if Wizz Air flew to Stuart and then utilized? They got the rights to fly some domestic sectors inside, and then turn around. Could that be something?
Absolutely. And you know what? You could probably do that because Sleepy Joe wouldn't even realize it was happening.
I would say that would be too much complexity probably for a business model.
I can't see then. I mean, if they operated it, they certainly wouldn't get fifth freedoms, so it'd be a dead sector, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, Hans, let's get to Scandinavia. Lots of interesting things happening there, as always. But now we have some fresh news. Let's say on Finnair, which is not a big carrier, but making some big noise recently, going to Stockholm and flying long haul to the US, to Thailand as well. Also very recently, as it was also presented on one of the Simple Flying articles, they sold 4 of their A350s back to the lessor. So to me, it seems like at the same time they are like trying to bring some cash in, and at the same time they are preparing to potentially burn a lot of cash, as we know. Flying long haul is always very demanding on costs. So how do you read their strategy in Stockholm?
Yeah, well, just we did a short recap on the situation for Finnair. Finnair is the major airline flying from Europe to mainland China. Yeah, China's borders are more or less closed for foreign long-haul airlines. So Finnair had to ground most of their long-haul wide-body fleets without those flying with cargo, mainly seafood from Norway to some Asian destinations. So, and I don't think Finnair has this power by the hour agreements as some like Norwegian and Norse have negotiated. So the cost for having those big birds standing on the ground is pretty high. So I guess Finnair would see there is an opportunity now when SAS is on their knees and moving the capacity down to Copenhagen, and Norwegian is out of the market for long haul from Stockholm. Asia markets are closed. Okay, let's try to fly the birds out of Stockholm Arlanda. And I think there has been a fight between SAS and Finnair for ages, since the talks of have a merger of those 2 airlines have been put on the table sometimes many years ago. I don't think it will ever happen. But I think to get into SAS backyard with long haul is maybe a dream that Finnair will have, and now they're doing it. And could it be money for them to fly from Stockholm? I think they start now beginning of November to fly to Miami, New York, and I think it was either Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Well, time will show. The prices, the fares are not very cheap. They are okay, but they will also fill up the flights with seafood and cargo from Norway, because Finnair has a very good position on delivery on the perishables. So combined, they will see an opportunity here to utilize their fleet and maybe go break even. Best case, if they make a profit, well, we don't know, but break even I think would be good for Finnair instead of losing money.
This is just disruptive behaviour, isn't it? I mean, if it was happening at school, you'd clip someone around the ear and tell them to get out of the classroom. They've got spare capacity. They're going to go into a market that they're perfectly entitled to go into, and it will be disruptive for SAS. And for every restaurant in those 3 big cities, they'll have fresh salmon on their tables every day.
Definitely.
You know, so the US lunch and dinner set will be satisfied with what's happening. And they'll, as you say, Hans, they'll pick up some passengers. But we've seen this in other markets, haven't we, during COVID-19? I mean, a lot of experimentation, more so in the United States, the use of wide-bodied aircraft between hubs just to keep them flying, and other such things. So it's no surprise what they're doing. They've found somewhere, and good luck to them. But
to be fair to Finnair, I mean, what choice have they got though? You know, they just can't go to Asia. They don't know when they'll be able to go to Asia profitably, apart from just with a cargo flight. You know, and the US is there. They've got these A350s that need to be filled. So they're going to point their capacity wherever it can go. You know, I think it's interesting that Chicago is going year round, because that's not typically a winter destination, but obviously there's something that is going on in Finnair's head that thinks it would work.
It will be rammed with connecting traffic going onwards with American, you know.
Yeah, quite possibly.
So that's where the market is. I think most one world carriers see Chicago as a great hub into the Midwest, and you can fill anything or nearly anything.
Yeah, and as you say, you know, until the travel restrictions ease off, they've got the cargo to make those flights profitable. So why not? Why not?
They do the same. SAS is doing the same. The flights they operate to North America, to the United States, are mainly driven by cargo. But back to Finnair, I mean, if this is a sustainable strategy from Finnair, well, time will show if they want to stay in Stockholm for a while, or just use the capacity they have available now to get some passenger and what we thought to get in a cash flow neutral situation on the operations there. That we will see. But you should know that Finnair is very good position with brand and market knowledge on the east side of Sweden, which is the Stockholm catchment area. So Finnair product will not have any problems to compete, on that respect. So and Finnair knows about this, and well, let's see if they are really, and they need to have a deal with the pilot union and the crew union. They had some issues with that. It's costly to transport crew from Finnish crew to Sweden. I mean, it's not a cheap operation to do this.
Hans, will this be covered under the JV within the One World Alliance?
Actually, I'm not sure if that. I asked, the Finnair CEO on his last quarter call to get some more flavor on what are the plans with Stockholm. Of course, he didn't want to tell too much. I never heard anything about the JV. I'm not sure if that can be done from a third country, actually. But what I asked him about is something else. If he could use the Finnair rights over Russia to fly in the the Siberian corridor, fly at least from Stockholm to Tokyo, that they cannot do. The rights does not open up for using those from third countries. So if they go to Asia from Stockholm, it will be like Thailand or India. Couldn't be more to the southeast. Is not accessible because it's too far away to fly.
Well, they could of course get the rights, but they'd have to leave a dirty brown envelope somewhere in Moscow for someone to pick up, wouldn't they?
I doubt that. The Russians are pretty strict on that. So and I asked the CEO about that, and I got a clear answer that there are very strict, tight regulations on this. So I don't think we will see that kind of operation from Finnair from Stockholm or any other.
Whatever they would have to pay would be just a small percentage of what the overflight cost would be.
I'm not sure they'll stay. I really don't think they will. It's about to get very crowded in Arlanda because we've got North Atlantic kicking off next year. And Eurowings, of course, arrives in March as well.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a lot of cheaper capacity for Arlanda than Finnair is going to be able to provide. So I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't just pull back and head back to Finland in this spring.
I agree with you, John. I think this is a temporary solution, but if it comes up to be a success, and we have this downwind on particularly on China for a longer period, I mean, Finnair, they just need to find a solution on that. As you probably know, they did a sale and leaseback agreement now for 4 A350s, which brought in about $400 million US dollars liquidity to Finnair. I think that comes in pretty handy now. It's well, let's see. But anyway, Scandinavia is going to be a battleground, and in particularly, you know, the target, the chasing company area is that been chased is us.
Historically, winter battlegrounds end up with someone dying, don't they?
It might do that, but you know, SAS is very strong in terms of governmental ownership, state ownership by Sweden and Denmark. Norway, they don't own any shares in SAS. They sold the last one for a couple of years ago. SAS have been struggling pretty hard, but they are managed. But now new things surface. They have troubles with the unions because of they are trying to put on 2 new production platforms, SAS Connect and SAS Link. That will be lower cost type of production.
Hans, why 2? One wasn't enough. They needed 2.
Well, because one of them will work and one won't. It's quite obvious.
I can give a very short brief.
Yes, please do.
SAS Connect is going to be operated by A320 Neos, and that will fly more high-density routes and compete directly with particularly with Norwegian, domestically and intra-Scandinavian, and with the other Ryanair, Eurowings, and so on, from Stockholm and Copenhagen out to leisure destinations in Europe. While SAS Link is going to fly on thin routes with Embraer 195 E1, which is I think it has 100 to 120 seats capability. They will have at least 6 of those that will arrive in the beginning of next year. So they will fly those routes that the A320s are too big for. So that's why SAS has been trying to establish this kind of platform a long time with the unions, but that has been not too successful. And I'm a bit worried of what's going on behind the curtains now on the situation for SAS, because the competitors, they clearly understand that the more the noise inside the company, the better situation for us to chase market shares. And so SAS need to find a way out of this mess.
I mean, good luck to them. But, in Europe, the mainline carriers don't tend to have a great run of luck with setting up their own little low-cost branches, do they? I mean, we've seen pretty much every single one's had a go now, I think, and they've all failed in the long run. So, you think they'd live and learn and just leave the low-cost for low-cost.
It's almost like BA at Gatwick, isn't it? And Michael O'Leary's wonderful quote about what's the definition of insanity. Doing something again and again.
And expecting a different result. Yeah.
It's just, dear, oh dear. How many times has SAS tried this, Hans?
Well, the last I remember is the airline called Snowflake. And why Snowflake? Yes. It should start fly like anywhere, all over the place.
And then melts as soon as it gets a little bit hot.
The problem for SAS is they are being, SAS was almost bankrupt in 2012. It was just 5-10 minutes, and I'm not underestimating. It was a few minutes before all the lawyers were ready to sign the papers, and all the aircrafts were flying in the air, so that no one could be grounded, taking possession at any airport. So, but finally they got to agreement in the 12th hour. Since then, SAS has been constantly trying to cut the costs, but it hasn't been cut enough. And now when the competition is increasing, what we call the business segment is fading away. We don't know how much that impact will be yet, but let's say that it fades away something between 20 to 40%. And if you look on the composition, leisure, business travel with SAS, it's like 50-50. But then SAS need to emerge to be more leisure travel orientated, and then the price factor is so important. And SAS mainline, they can never get competitive on that segment. That's why they try to, with these two, at least with SAS Connect, to be competitive to some extent in that market, particularly against Norwegian. They will never be able to compete with Ryanair or Wizz Air, and that's not SAS target. It's Norwegian and maybe EasyJet and Eurowings, which can be.
Hans, if you subscribe to the concept of the aviation economic cycle, and the industry performs in a sort of circle of success and not, and SAS were last in trouble in 2012, and we tend to have 9-10 year cycles. Are you going to be predicting that 2022 could be 5 minutes away from the clock ticking down again on SAS?
No, I don't think so. I think SAS will manage. SAS is extremely important for labor and the big airports in Scandinavia, particularly in Arlanda, but not at least for Copenhagen. So SAS actually, they have to find a solution internally to carry on, and they have to change into a different airline. So I'm not in that position that will say that they are close to getting grounded. Not at all. I think SAS will manage, but we will see a different type of SAS than we saw before. And still, when I say that the business segment is going to fade away to some extent, we don't know that yet. How that will impact on the important domestic market in Norway, particularly, which represent 50% of SAS revenues on domestic Norway, is very important. And the battle there will be between SAS and Norwegian. Mm-hmm. So if SAS can deliver on the product and get good revenue from Norway, they will be pretty good off. But I think Norwegian will give them a hell of a fight.
I guess the most important battle will be within SAS between the management and the unions. How likely do you think they will find an agreement? How likely is that?
It's very hard to predict. I don't think it will go to a conflict level, despite the fact that every day read in newspapers, statements from both sides of the table. It's hardcore. Those unions are hardcore. But what's interesting is that for SAS Connect and SAS Link, a collective agreement actually has been signed by a union in Denmark. And there is a large number of pilots and crew that are ready to start working for those airlines. Mm-hmm. These pilots and crew, they were laid off when SAS cut their staff with 50% the last year. But they are willing to work in SAS Connect and SAS Link with these new terms. And I don't think it's not so much about salaries, because pressure on salaries and pilots in Europe, they get well paid because there is a lack of pilots, right? So it's more in terms of efficiency, to fly more hours, to have more flexibility, to have this operational efficiency that get into what we call a cost component, that makes us more competitive. But they can't do that in SAS mainline.
But doesn't this all come down to the complexity of the overall business? You've got different units in different countries with different working conditions and all of those sort of things. It has never been sorted out. No one has had the balls to actually sort it out and make some of the really tough decisions. Hindsight is wonderful, but wouldn't it have been funny if Michael O'Leary or Willie Walsh were in charge of SAS? Because it wouldn't be in the situation that we're in now.
That is, SAS have been, I think they have had up to 40 different unions in one company. Yeah. And I think actually that also is a bottleneck. If an airline would be interested to buy or take over SAS, they have to take with them all those unions. And I mean, unions are good for me, but I mean, SAS, they really struggle, and they are not able to get implemented those plans. The management and the board and the owners want to.
So close the business. Why don't you close the business down, stop flying for a week, and reconstitute it and call it something else?
No, you can't do that.
Why can't you do that?
That's not how it works. I mean,
why isn't it how it works? That's how it would work. That's, there is a fundamental problem in this business. Sort it. If you can't sort it, close it, start again.
Well, basically, that's what North Atlantic is about, isn't it?
Yeah, precisely.
Well, but that is a different story. Norwegian reconstructed.
Yeah, it's more complicated.
Came out.
That,
I mean, the Norwegian reconstruction, I think, will stand out as a class business case for most business industries in the world. Who could imagine that this was possible to do? It was, but it also shows that the investors in the finance markets, they really believe in the future of aviation, of airlines. If not, Norwegian would have no chance to get through this. And I think that SIS and the brand and the strength in Scandinavia is so good that SAS will not be, put into danger. But they need to sort out and to get ready to compete with in a new environment, which goes more on leisure, visit friends and relatives, holidays, than business travel that has been the cash cow for SAS for many years.
Indeed, yes. So fingers crossed and good luck to them. We have the first question in the Q&A from our audience today, and it basically creates a nice segue to our last topic, which we wanted to discuss anyway, which is the consolidation in Europe and what can we expect from the upcoming winter, which is obviously always the hardest time of the year for the airlines. So question from Tony Holwood, which European airlines do you see as targets for consolidation post-COVID, John?
Good question from Tony. Someone must have fed him that rather than thinking of it for himself. But I've always wondered how some of these Central European airlines have managed to survive and keep going, apart from state aid or cash or whatever support they were getting. And Croatia Airlines would always be in that group. How have they managed to keep going through all of this?
Czech Airlines as well.
Czech Airlines as well. But is
one of the oldest airlines in the world, and again they are on the edge of collapse, and who knows if it will.
Yeah. But is it consolidation, or do you just let them go out of business? Because why would you pay anything for these things that are structurally failing, have networks that are of no value, and then once they've actually collapsed, pick up those few pieces that are worthwhile? That would seem to me, for any of the big boys, a better strategy, unless someone is holding on to a large bank of slots at an airport that is relatively constrained, and that is not the case for any of these.
Mm-hmm.
I look at it sometimes, and I sort of do this pragmatic thing. Look at an airline network churn. If it's changing more than 30% of its network in a year, outside of what's happened in the last 18 months and COVID, if it's changing that degree of its network from season to season or year to year, it is struggling to find a place for itself in the market. And if that is the case, it should just get out of the market.
Yeah. Joe, what are your views on that? Do you see any casualties potentially coming within the upcoming winter on the European sky?
So, no, not really. I think, overall, we've seen some incredible work by European airlines in terms of the amount of costs that they've taken out of their businesses. If you look at the reductions that they're publishing on their balance sheets, like 25, 30, 40% of costs have been removed from their operations. That's huge amounts of money. And that is just gross inefficiency that has been built into the business over years and years and years. And, this has almost provided them like a pause, like a moment to stop and think, hang on a minute, why are we still doing it like this? Is there a better way to do it? And I do think, for most, certainly the Western European airlines, they're in a really good position now. You know, they've really shored up their liquidity, shored up their capital. They can see themselves through a winter. I don't think that doesn't mean there's going to be some consolidation, because we do need it in Europe. You know, there's an incredible number of airlines. I was reading this morning, I think the top 25 airlines in Europe are equivalent to the top 6 in the US, you know, so like basically those airlines could all squish into 3 different groups and that would still be sustainable. So yeah, I mean, I think there could be something going on. If I had to pick something radical to float today, I reckon Jet2 could be a really good buy for British Airways. You know, stick them down in their Gatwick slots, make them a leisure airline operating out of London. You know, Jet2 are doing some really cool stuff in the north of England. They've got a really solid holiday and leisure business. They don't care about business travellers, you know. And I think, you know, as a British Airways subsidiary or sister company, that could be really cool and that could be a really good use of their slots. And I'd love to have more access to Jet2 because they're far too far north for me.
Mm-hmm. John, have you ever heard about an idea like that? Jet2 becoming a family member for BA?
Jet2 came to Gatwick and flew some flights to Manchester, and you know, that was when BA were on the route and got completely and utterly stuffed. You know, which if you're going to do it, you got to do it properly, and that means critical mass. And the only way Jet2 could get into Gatwick, Joe's right, you know, you've got to buy your way in or be bought in by someone to get the scale that they would need. They're fine north of London. You know, it's quite a select area down here in the southeast. And, you know, we don't really need Jet2 as another brand.
But you've got Ryanair all over the place. Yeah, you know, you've got like a rash of Ryanair over there.
Yeah, and you know, we've got, to be honest, look, we've got a more sophisticated leisure market that doesn't need a tour operator to tell it where it goes. Most people book themselves directly rather than have to be told they're going to Mallorca to get a donkey.
Some people like going to Mallorca to get on donkeys, John.
Oh, I don't. I thought they did. I'm not stereotyping the type of holiday you have, Joe.
But your plans are for Lanzarote, is that correct, John? Is that still happening?
Yeah, well, flying's back, you know, and it's really, God, the complexity of flying. I'm off to Lanzarote, as you know, on Thursday, but you've got to get a COVID test.
Is this Thursday?
Yeah, and but then I'm coming straight back and out to Canada, so I've got to get a PCR test in Lanzarote. Then you've got to get one in the UK on the one day you are here. But it doesn't matter if you prove positive because you'll be in Canada by then. So who cares? Who cares a monkeys in the UK? But you know, the whole complexity. I understand why people are nervous about flying now, because you know, you could just find some check-in agent who is not au fait with the latest protocols, processes, and the answer is no. You know, you're not flying, and then after your flight's gone, someone says, "Oh, actually, you did have all the right paperwork." And I think a lot of people are still worried about that, certainly in the UK and probably in most parts of Europe.
I said to Juraj before, I went out to Zurich to meet with Helvetic Airways and try out their E2 coming back to London, and the amount of paperwork I had, like actual physical paperwork, you know, for years now, you've checked into your flight with the tap of a smartphone and you've done everything. Yeah, exactly, John. You know, it was literally like a binder of bits of paper and everybody wanted to see everything in hard copy. And you just think, God, am I back in the 90s? You know, it's the sooner they get the digital travel pass business sorted out, the better, I think, because this isn't good for trees or for my sanity.
Hans, I know you've been flying over in summer as well. So how was your experience?
I mainly been flying in domestically Norway, and that was actually pretty full flights. And both with SAS and Norwegian, and even with Flyr. I had the pleasure of having the inaugural flight with Flyr up to far north in Tromsø, and it was a very good experience. So just support Joanna and John about the you know, the need for that the market understands that you can fly safe in terms of documentation, health certificates, that the check-in agent knows that your papers are valid, that the machines can read it, and that you have the barcode and the system works when it comes to that airport somewhere. I think that we need to have a regional and then a global structure on this to support the growth of aviation, and that all this can be done digital in those markets who are developed for that. That's mandatory. Because I think we're going to struggle. We're going to have this part of the journey with us for years, unfortunately. So we just have to adapt to it and find systems that can make sure that the traveler can be confident that nothing will really happen. It might be, I don't know if Joanna and John agrees on that, but it might be that non-stop flights will be preferred over one stop, and you're actually willing to pay a premium to fly non-stop to avoid any hassle at our airport going forward.
If you have that option, of course, which is not the case for many regions. Yeah.
I saw there was an interesting bit of research right at the start of the pandemic about Qantas's ultra long haul flights, Project Sunrise as they call it, which wants to come from Sydney to London. And the person that did the research, they reckoned that they could charge a premium of around 25 to 30%, and people would pay it to avoid having to transit in either Singapore or the Middle East or Asia or whatever, just purely because of the hassle and the sort of fear of being in a foreign country. So I guess we'll have to wait and see if that actually plays out that way.
To Juraj's point, probably that is only valid for 30% of journeys. Lots of regional airports in Europe need that connectivity, and it's important to them, otherwise they can't function. And talking of airports, Joe, you said we've got too many airlines in Europe. I agree. Have we got too many airports in Europe?
Quite possibly. There's a lot of secondary airports, and they're all favourites of Ryanair. I remember when I was speaking to the CEO of EasyJet, he said, we don't want to fly you to somewhere you can't pronounce, and that is exactly what Ryanair does all the time.
They're short-term favourites of Ryanair, aren't they? As soon as a deal goes, then Ryanair goes with it.
True. That is very true.
Look at the position in Southend this winter. It's going to be the biggest Christmas market in London. It's got no flights. It might as well do something with its terminal buildings. So, but genuinely, it's part of the whole thing that we're going through, this consolidation about there's just too many airports.
I agree with you on that, and in terms of Ryanair and Wizz Air and the likes. Of course, for one secondary airport to rely on one major supplier of capacity is very risky business. It can just happen that it's not the airport itself that have to change the charges and fees domain. It could be the government who suddenly comes in with a passenger duty, like happened in Norway in 2016. There was a small airport outside Oslo called Rygge, and Ryanair had a base there with 4 or 5 aircraft. And then this passenger tax came, and Ryanair said, if we don't take it out, we're gonna close down our base. The government didn't.
That's what they did.
And it was closed down, 1,000 jobs lost, and the airport has been empty since 2016, not one flight.
And to be fair to Ryanair and anyone who does that, at least they are being true to their word. And they are telling you from the beginning, this is what we need to operate, and if you can't fulfill it on a long-term basis, then we're out and we will go. And it's much more black and white than to take the example of SAS we were talking about earlier. Someone who keeps chipping away and keeps trying to change things little by little. You've got to be radical sometimes. You've got to be really bold and go for it. I remember when we went into COVID, talking to a US refinancing expert on an African conference, and he was saying, make the deepest cuts first time round, and then you don't have to do it again, but be absolutely ruthless about what you do first time.
But one thing you can be sure of with Ryanair, if you have an airport, is that if Ryanair promise you to deliver 300,000 passengers, 500,000 passengers, 1 million passengers per year at that agreed deal, they will.
Yeah.
they never fail on that.
For those of you who don't know Hans' background, he used to work for Ryanair, so he knows what he's talking about.
I know what you're talking about, and it's I can just say that this works if the deal is right, and Ryanair say we will deliver. They always do. And they're incredible good in doing that. Yeah.
Has anyone seen the latest Alitalia cabin staff uniforms? Talking of airlines that we thought were going to fail and never did. I mean, they're in new ownership now, aren't they? So does that mean a new uniform, a new brand? Anyone picked up anything there?
I believe so. I don't know about the uniform side of things, but I believe ITAR is going to be a completely separate brand. I think part of the deal was they weren't allowed to carry through the Alitalia brand, so that is a separate thing. So yeah, it's going to be new liveries, new uniforms, lots of work for seamstresses and paint shops down in Italy.
And definitely great topic for us to discuss on the next session. So for today, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. Fantastic conversation as always. Really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. And before we say goodbye, Joe, why don't you share with us the plans of Simple Flying and AviaDev for a future flying forum? What is it? Who is it for? What is it about? Why people should register if they haven't yet?
Cool. We're so pleased to be working with AviaDev. These guys have been such a great support to us from the very start. And they've been with us right through all our growth. So this is kind of the pinnacle of our relationship and our great webinars that we ran together over the summer. So this is going to be the Future Flying Forum, and it will be running on the 10th and the 11th of November. And it's kind of like a virtual flight. So we're going to strap you in the very east of Asia, possibly Oceania. And we're going to fly across, we're going to follow the sun from 7 o'clock in the morning GMT until 1300 GMT. And we'll be touching down in the Middle East that day. Day 2, we'll be taking off in Europe, passing over Africa and into the Americas. So along the way, we're going to be touching down to speak with airline CEOs, to speak with interesting technology companies, OEMs, engine manufacturers. And this is all about the future of flight. We're fed up of looking back and talking about how awful the last couple of years have been. We all know about that. We want to talk about where we're going next. And what's happening next, and all the future, how the future of aviation is looking globally. So we'd be delighted for everyone to join us. You can find out more about it at futureflyingforum.com. We'll be publishing an agenda later this week, so do keep your eye on that page for more information. And I can exclusively reveal to the audience today that one of our headline speakers is going to be Mr. David Neilman, of course, of JetBlue fame and TAP Portugal and Azul, and now his latest startup, Breeze Airways. So I can't wait to talk to him. He's going to be such an interesting guest. And of course, it's all free. Do register at Future Flying Forum, get your boarding pass now, and we'll keep you updated with speaker announcements and program additions as we go forward.
I wouldn't say it better myself. Thanks a lot, Joe. And for now, that's it from us today. Thanks a lot, John, Hans, Joe. Fantastic talking to you. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys.
Stay
Bye.
safe, everyone. Cheers.